Dr. Alex Morrison had always believed that the most dangerous thing in his laboratory was the experimental fertilizer that occasionally produced crops capable of mild luminescence, but as he stood in the VIP reception area of New Haven Colony's spaceport, staring at a figure from his childhood who'd grown into something that could probably negotiate the surrender of small planets, he was rapidly revising his assessment of personal risk factors. The Valerian diplomatic vessel dominated the landing pad like a crystalline mountain that had decided to take up interstellar travel as a hobby. Its bioluminescent hull patterns pulsed with the kind of rhythmic precision that suggested either advanced alien technology or a really expensive light show, and Alex had been trying very hard not to think about it for the past 3 hours while focusing on his wheat samples that kept insisting on growing in shades of purple that violated several agricultural regulations. Dar. Morrison, Colony Administrator Chen had announced that morning with the kind of barely contained excitement usually reserved for announcing lottery winners or successful tax audits. The Valerian delegation has specifically requested your presence. They claim prior acquaintance. Alex had spent the walk to the spaceport running through every professional conference, research symposium, and academic publication he could remember, trying to identify any possible connection to the Valerian Empire. The highly advanced civilization was known throughout the galaxy for their sophisticated biotechnology, complex diplomatic protocols, and a cultural approach to formal agreements that made galactic trade law look like a children's game of pretend. The spaceport's VIP area had been hastily decorated with both human and Valerian symbolic elements, creating a cultural fusion that looked like someone had asked an anthropologist to plan a party while suffering from diplomatic anxiety. Earth flowers sat next to Valerian crystal arrangements that hummed with barely audible harmonics, and the refreshment table featured both human coffee and Valerian liquid sustenance that glowed softly and probably contained more nutrients than most people consumed in a week. When the delegation finally emerged from their vessel, Alex immediately understood why Colony Administrator Chen had been treating this like a state visit. The Valorians moved with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested either military training or really excellent dance instruction, their elongated forms draped in ceremonial robes that seemed to shift color based on ambient lighting conditions. At the center of the group walked a woman who commanded attention through sheer presence rather than obvious authority. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her elegant pointed ears catching the artificial lighting of the reception area, and her silver-flecked eyes surveyed the assembled colonists with the kind of analytical precision that suggested she was simultaneously calculating everyone's psychological profiles and planning the most efficient route through the room. Alex felt recognition hit him like a malfunctioning gravity generator. Zephyra? He said, the name emerging from memories he'd buried under 15 years of academic focus and adult responsibilities. She turned toward him with fluid grace, and her expression remained coolly formal as she approached. Gone was the curious 10-year-old alien girl who used to sneak away from her diplomatic parents to explore the colony's farms and pepper him with questions about Earth agriculture. This woman wore authority like a perfectly fitted garment, and when she spoke, her voice carried the kind of precise articulation that suggested multiple advanced degrees and possibly experience in interstellar negotiations. Alexander Morrison, she said, her tone holding no trace of childhood familiarity. I have returned to fulfill our childhood covenant. The words hit Alex like a cargo transport moving at unsafe velocities. Around them, the reception area fell silent except for the soft humming of Valerian crystal arrangements and the increasingly loud sound of Alex's heart trying to escape through his throat. I'm sorry, what covenant? He managed, his voice carrying the kind of strained cheerfulness usually associated with people who just realized they were standing in an airlock that someone was about to cycle. Zephyra's silver-flecked eyes regarded him with what might have been surprise or possibly professional disappointment. The marriage agreement we concluded 15 years ago, during my family's diplomatic visit to this colony. Surely you remember the ceremony we conducted in your family's agricultural sector. Alex's mental archives, which had been running a desperate search for relevant memories, suddenly produced a flood of images featuring 2 10-year-olds playing in his parents' cornfield. The memory hit him with vivid clarity, Zephyra asking about human mating customs after observing his parents' affectionate behavior, and his 10-year-old self, puffed up with the importance of explaining human culture to an alien visitor, declaring that when they grew up, he would marry her and they would have the biggest wedding in the galaxy. "Oh no," Alex said, his voice containing approximately 17 different kinds of panic. "Oh no, no, no. That was just. We were kids playing pretend. That wasn't a real." Valerian culture recognizes no distinction between childhood promises and adult commitments when they involve matters of personal honor, Zephyra interrupted with the kind of clinical precision that suggested she'd memorized legal texts on the subject. "Your declaration was witnessed by my diplomatic escort and recorded in official archives. The agreement has been legally binding for 15 years. Colony Administrator Chen stepped forward with the kind of diplomatic smile that suggested he was either very excited about improved human-Valorian relations or completely terrified of accidentally starting an interstellar incident. "Dr. Morrison, perhaps we should discuss this in a more private setting." "Discuss what?" Alex said, his voice rising toward frequencies that probably violated noise ordinances. "There's nothing to discuss. I was 10 years old. She was 10 years old. We were playing in a cornfield." Zephyra's expression shifted slightly, and Alex caught a glimpse of something that might have been hurt beneath her formal composure. "Are you suggesting that your word as a human child carries no weight? That your species teaches dishonor to its young?" "No. I mean, yes. I mean." Alex felt like he was navigating through an asteroid field while blindfolded and possibly intoxicated. Human children say things they don't understand all the time. We have entire educational systems built around the concept that kids need time to figure out what they actually mean before anyone holds them to major life decisions. "How fascinating," said one of Zephyra's diplomatic escorts, a stern-looking Valerian male whose robes seemed to shift toward darker colors when he spoke. "This suggests significant cultural divergence in approaches to personal integrity and commitment protocols." Alex's communicator chose that moment to chime with an incoming message from his mother, who had apparently learned about the situation from the colony's news feed. The message simply read, "Alexander, why am I finding out about your engagement from the morning announcements? Call me immediately." "This is not happening," Alex muttered, staring at his communicator like it had personally betrayed him. "This is some kind of elaborate practical joke involving interstellar travel and diplomatic immunity." Zephyra stepped closer, and Alex caught a subtle scent that reminded him of alien flowers and advanced chemistry. "I assure you, Alexander, this is not a joke. I have spent 15 years preparing for our marriage. I have studied human culture, learned your languages, and completed advanced degrees in xenobiology and terraforming to ensure compatibility with your chosen profession. You've been planning this for 15 years. Alex's voice cracked like he was going through puberty again, which seemed appropriate considering the circumstances. "Of course," Zephyra replied with the kind of matter-of-fact tone usually reserved for discussing weather conditions or inventory management. "Valerian courtship protocols require extensive preparation. I have researched human marriage customs, familiarized myself with Earth agricultural techniques, and even learned to prepare traditional human foods, though I must admit your species' relationship with dairy products remains somewhat mystifying." Alex looked around the reception area, noting that several colonists were recording the conversation with their personal devices, probably planning to sell the footage to gossip networks under headlines like "Local Scientist Accidentally Engaged to Alien Royalty," or "10-Year-Old Promise Becomes Galactic Incident." "Zephyra," he said carefully, trying to project calm rationality while his internal systems were performing the emotional equivalent of an emergency reactor shutdown, "I think there's been a significant cultural misunderstanding here." She tilted her head with the kind of precise movement that suggested either curiosity or the activation of advanced scanning protocols. "Please explain this misunderstanding." When human children make promises like that, especially during play, they're not creating legal obligations. They're practicing. Learning about concepts they don't fully understand yet. Like when kids say they want to be space pirates or professional ice cream tasters when they grow up. You compare marriage to space piracy? Zephyra's eyebrows, which were longer and more elegant than standard human configurations, rose in what appeared to be genuine confusion. No. I mean, both are hypothetical career paths that 10-year-olds might find exciting without fully understanding the practical implications, legal requirements, or long-term consequences involved in. Alex stopped himself before he could dig the conversational hole any deeper. The point is, children often say things they don't mean. Zephyra was quiet for a long moment, her silver-flecked eyes studying him with the kind of intensity that suggested she was running complex calculations involving his psychological profile, cultural background, and probably his recent dietary choices. "Are you saying," she said finally, her voice carrying a note that might have been disappointment or possibly scientific curiosity, "that you did not mean what you said when you promised to marry me and take care of me forever?" The question hung in the air like a malfunctioning gravity field, and Alex realized that his answer could potentially determine whether this became a heartwarming story about childhood friends reuniting or a diplomatic disaster involving hurt feelings and interstellar legal complications. Around them, the reception area had fallen completely silent except for the soft humming of Valerian technology and the distant sound of Alex's career in quiet botanical research crumbling into diplomatic complexity. The silence stretched until Alex felt like he was trapped in a temporal anomaly where awkward moments lasted approximately 17 times longer than physically possible. Colony Administrator Chen cleared his throat with the kind of diplomatic cough that suggested he was desperately trying to prevent an interstellar incident while simultaneously planning his resignation letter. "Perhaps," Chen said with forced cheerfulness, "we could continue this conversation in the conference room. I'm sure we can work through any cultural misunderstandings in a more private setting." Alex nodded gratefully, though he suspected that changing venues wouldn't make the fundamental problem any less catastrophic. As they moved toward the conference area, he became acutely aware that word was spreading through the colony with the kind of viral efficiency usually associated with gossip about who was dating whom and why the hydroponics bay kept producing vegetables that sang opera. His communicator chimed again with messages from friends, colleagues, and what appeared to be a reporter from the Galactic Agriculture Network asking for exclusive interview rights to "The Wedding of the Century." Alex silenced the device before it could inform him about any more people who were apparently more excited about his love life than he was. The conference room featured a large holographic display that currently showed peaceful scenes of New Haven's agricultural sectors, which seemed mockingly serene compared to Alex's current emotional state. Zephyra settled into a chair with fluid grace, while her diplomatic escort arranged themselves around the room like a formal honor guard protecting someone who could probably negotiate her way out of a black hole. "Now then," Chen said, activating his recording device with the kind of careful precision that suggested this conversation would definitely be entered into official diplomatic archives, "let's review the situation systematically." Zephyra gestured to one of her escorts, who stepped forward and activated a portable holographic projector. The device hummed to life, displaying what appeared to be an official Valerian document covered in elegant script that probably took years to learn to read properly. The marriage contract, the escort announced in accented standard Galactic, concluded 15 years ago between Zephyra Veltar of the Valerian Empire and Alexander Morrison of New Haven Colony, Earth Sector 7. Witnessed by 3 members of the diplomatic security detail and recorded in official archives according to Valerian legal protocols. "Wait," Alex said, feeling like he was watching someone else's life spiral into bureaucratic complexity, "you actually filed paperwork about this?" "Valerian culture requires documentation of all significant personal commitments," Zephyra explained with the patience of someone who'd spent considerable time studying alien cultural quirks. "Your declaration was made in the presence of official witnesses and involved matters of personal honor. Of course it was recorded." The holographic display shifted to show what appeared to be security footage from 15 years ago, featuring 2 children in a cornfield that Alex recognized as his family's farm. The image quality was remarkably clear, suggesting Valerian surveillance technology was significantly more advanced than anything humans had been using at the time. "Oh, this is getting worse," Alex muttered, watching his 10-year-old self gesture dramatically while explaining something to young Zephyra, who listened with the kind of serious attention that suggested she was memorizing every word. The audio activated, and Alex heard his own child's voice declaring with absolute confidence, "When we're grown up, I'll marry you, Zephyra. We'll have the biggest wedding in the whole galaxy, and I'll take care of you forever and ever." I promise. Young Zephyr's response was equally enthusiastic. Really? You would choose me as your mate even though I'm different from human females? Especially because you're different, 10-year-old Alex had replied with the kind of earnest conviction that only children could muster. You're the smartest person I've ever met, and you ask the best questions about everything. Plus your ears are really cool and you can do that thing where you make flowers glow just by touching them. Present-day Alex watched this exchange with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for viewing footage of oneself dancing badly at parties. I can't believe you kept a recording of this. Standard diplomatic protocol, the escort replied with professional neutrality. All interactions between Valerian citizens and alien species are documented for cultural analysis and future reference. Cultural analysis, Alex repeated weakly. Right. Of course. Zephyra had been watching the playback with an expression that was difficult to interpret, though Alex thought he detected something that might have been nostalgia beneath her formal composure. You were very certain in your declaration, she observed. Your body language and vocal patterns suggested complete sincerity. I was 10. Alex protested. At that age, I was also completely sincere about wanting to become a professional dragon tamer when I grew up. Sincerity and practical feasibility are not the same thing. Dragon tamer? Zephyr's eyebrows rose with what appeared to be genuine interest. I was not aware that Earth maintained dragon populations for occupational purposes. We don't have dragons, Alex explained, feeling like he was teaching a course in Human Childhood Fantasies 101. That's exactly my point. Children often declare intentions to pursue careers or relationships that don't exist in the real world. Chen leaned forward with the kind of diplomatic expression that suggested he was trying to find middle ground between conflicting cultural frameworks. Perhaps we could focus on finding a mutually acceptable resolution that honors both human and Valerian perspectives. There is no resolution needed, Zephyra said with quiet certainty. Alexander made a commitment, I accepted it, and I have spent 15 years preparing to fulfill our agreement. I have studied human agricultural techniques, learned Earth languages, and completed advanced degrees in xenobiology and terraforming specifically to complement his chosen profession. Alex felt his mental processes performing the equivalent of an emergency restart. You've been planning your entire adult life around a promise I made when I was 10 years old. Of course, Zephyr replied as if this were the most natural thing in the galaxy. Valerian courtship protocols require extensive preparation. I needed to ensure that I would be a suitable partner for a human botanist. I have researched Earth crop cultivation, studied human nutritional requirements, and even learned to prepare traditional foods from your home region, though I must admit your species' relationship with fermented beverages remains somewhat puzzling. You learned to cook human food? Alex's voice carried the kind of disbelief usually associated with discovering that gravity was actually optional. Among other skills, Zephyr confirmed. I have also mastered 17 human recreational activities that statistical analysis suggests are popular among botanists, including what you call hiking, bird watching, and complaining about government agricultural regulations. Despite everything, Alex felt a laugh trying to escape. You studied complaining as a recreational activity? The research indicated that botanists derive significant satisfaction from discussing bureaucratic inefficiencies, Zephyra said with complete seriousness. I have prepared extensive material on topics including unreasonable inspection schedules, inadequate funding for soil analysis, and the apparent inability of administrators to understand growing seasons. Alex's communicator chose that moment to chime with another message, this time from his research assistant. Boss, heard about the wedding. Should I postpone the wheat harvest data analysis meeting? Also, your mom called the lab 17 times asking about catering preferences. Please advise. This is insane, Alex muttered, staring at the message. My entire life is becoming a diplomatic incident based on something I said in a cornfield 15 years ago. Zephyr's expression shifted slightly, and Alex caught a glimpse of something that might have been vulnerability beneath her formal composure. Are you saying that you regret making the promise? That you find the prospect of honoring your commitment unpleasant? The question hung in the air with the weight of potential interstellar complications, and Alex realized that his answer could affect not just his own future, but potentially diplomatic relations between two entire civilizations. Around the table, everyone waited for his response with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for defusing explosive devices or negotiating peace treaties. Alex started, then stopped, realizing that whatever he said next would probably be recorded, analyzed, and possibly quoted in diplomatic history texts for the next century. Alex spent the next 3 hours discovering that having an accidental fiancé was significantly more complicated than any agricultural crisis he'd ever encountered, including the infamous incident with the self-harvesting corn that had developed opinions about labor relations. Word of his engagement had spread through New Haven Colony with the kind of viral efficiency that suggested the communication network had been specifically designed to maximize embarrassment potential. His laboratory had been transformed into what appeared to be an impromptu wedding planning headquarters. His research assistant, Dr. Maya Patel, had apparently taken it upon herself to coordinate what she cheerfully described as the most scientifically interesting marriage ceremony in colonial history. Charts covering optimal wedding scheduling based on crop rotation cycles covered his workbenches, while his experimental greenhouse had been invaded by neighbors offering advice on flowers that would be culturally appropriate for an interspecies celebration. Maya, Alex said, surveying the chaos that had previously been his orderly research space, please tell me you haven't actually started planning a wedding. Of course not, Maya replied with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested she was lying through her teeth. I'm just conducting preliminary feasibility studies on ceremonial logistics. Did you know that Valerian marriage customs include a ritual exchange of biotechnological gifts? I've been researching what kind of genetically modified crops might be appropriate for expressing romantic commitment. Alex sat down heavily in what used to be his desk chair and was now apparently serving as a display stand for fabric samples. Maya, there isn't going to be a wedding. This whole thing is a cultural misunderstanding that we're going to resolve through careful diplomatic discussion. Aha, Maya said in the tone of someone who'd already mentally started writing wedding invitations. That's why your mom arrived on the morning transport with a suitcase full of what she described as emergency wedding supplies, right? My mother is here. Alex's voice rose toward frequencies that probably violated several noise ordinances. Already? She's in the colony's guest quarters, bonding with your fiancé over shared concerns about your dietary habits and laboratory safety practices, Maya continued cheerfully. Apparently, both human mothers and Valerian. Whatever Zephyr's family relationship status is, have similar opinions about men who forget to eat meals when they're absorbed in research. Alex felt reality performing the equivalent of a software malfunction. They're bonding. Your mom brought photo albums, Maya said with obvious delight. Zephyrah has been taking notes on what she calls Alexander's developmental behavioral patterns. I think she's conducting some kind of long-term psychological analysis. Before Alex could process this information fully, his communicator activated with an incoming call from his mother. Her face appeared in holographic form, beaming with the kind of maternal satisfaction usually reserved for announcing grandchildren or successful tax audits. Alexander, she said with obvious excitement. Why didn't you tell me you were engaged? I've been preparing for this possibility for years. Years? Alex repeated weakly. Mom, I haven't been engaged. This is all a misunderstanding based on something I said when I was 10. Oh, nonsense, his mother replied with the kind of dismissive wave that suggested she'd already decided how reality was going to work. I remember Zephyrah from her family's visit. Lovely girl, very intelligent, excellent questions about crop rotation techniques. I always hoped you'd stay in touch. Mom, you can't just decide that I'm getting married based on childhood conversations. I'm not deciding anything, she said with the patient tone of someone explaining obvious facts to a slow child. I'm simply supporting your decision to honor a commitment you made. Zephyrah has been telling me about all the preparation she's done to become a suitable partner for you. It's really quite touching. The call ended before Alex could mount a proper protest, leaving him staring at his communicator like it had personally betrayed him. Maya was watching this exchange with the kind of scientific interest usually reserved for observing rare biological phenomena. So, she said thoughtfully, on a scale of 1 to completely panicked, how are you handling the discovery that everyone in your life is more excited about your marriage than you are? I need to talk to Zephyra, Alex said, standing up with the kind of determined expression that suggested he was about to do something either very brave or spectacularly stupid. This whole situation needs to be resolved before it gets even more out of hand. Too late, Maya said, pointing toward the laboratory's main entrance. Look. Through the transparent walls, Alex could see a growing crowd of colonists gathering outside his research facility. Someone had apparently started setting up decorative displays, and he could see his neighbor Mrs. Patterson arranging what appeared to be flowers in patterns that probably had some kind of cultural significance he didn't understand. Are they throwing me a spontaneous engagement party? Alex asked with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for watching natural disasters unfold. Community celebration, Maya confirmed. Colony Administrator Chen announced it as an opportunity to demonstrate human-Valorian friendship and cooperation. Also, I think people are just excited to have something interesting happen for once. Alex's communicator chimed with a message from Zephyra. Alexander, I am currently in your family's residential quarters with your mother. She has expressed concerns about your tendency to work through meal times. We should discuss establishing proper nutritional schedules as part of our marriage planning. Also, she wishes to know your preferences regarding ceremonial color schemes. Ceremonial color schemes, Alex muttered, feeling like he was trapped in someone else's life. She's asking about ceremonial color schemes. That sounds pretty official, Maya observed with obvious amusement. Maybe you should consider the possibility that this isn't actually a cultural misunderstanding. Maybe Zephyra really did spend 15 years preparing to marry you, and maybe that level of dedication deserves more consideration than panic and denial. Alex looked at his research assistant with the kind of expression that suggested she had just suggested he consider career opportunities in professional cliff diving. Maya, I can't just marry someone because they've been planning it for 15 years. That's not how relationships work. Isn't it? Maya asked with the kind of philosophical tone that suggested she'd been thinking about this more seriously than he'd realized. I mean, most successful marriages involve people who've spent considerable time and effort preparing to be good partners. The only difference here is that Zephyra started preparing earlier and more systematically than most people. Before Alex could respond to this unsettling observation, the laboratory's entrance chimed with an incoming visitor. Zephyra entered with fluid grace, followed by Alex's mother, who was carrying what appeared to be a data pad full of notes and possibly wedding planning materials. Alexander, Zephyra said, her formal tone softened slightly by what might have been genuine concern, your mother has informed me that human males sometimes experience what she calls commitment anxiety when faced with major life decisions. Is this a medical condition that requires treatment? It's not a medical condition, Alex said quickly, before his mother could offer her own psychological analysis. It's a perfectly normal response to discovering that your entire life has been reorganized around a promise you don't remember making. But you do remember making it, Zephyra pointed out with clinical precision. We reviewed the recorded evidence. Your commitment was quite clear and apparently sincere. That doesn't mean I understood what I was committing to, Alex protested. 10-year-olds don't have the emotional or intellectual framework to make informed decisions about marriage contracts. Zephyra tilted her head with the kind of precise movement that suggested she was accessing internal databases. According to my research, human children begin forming attachment preferences and practicing relationship behaviors from early ages. Your declaration represented a natural expression of positive social bonding with an individual you found compatible. See? Alex's mother said with obvious satisfaction. Even as a child, you had excellent judgment about potential partners. Alex felt like he was being tag-teamed by a xenobiologist and his own mother, which was probably not covered in any standard diplomatic training manual. The point is, people change. I'm not the same person I was 15 years ago, and neither is Zephyra. We don't actually know each other as adults. An excellent observation, Zephyra said with what appeared to be genuine approval. This is why Valerian marriage customs include extensive pre-ceremony bonding protocols. We should begin immediately with compatibility assessments and shared activity development. Compatibility assessments. Alex's voice cracked like he was going through puberty again. Standard procedure, Zephyra confirmed. We will need to evaluate intellectual compatibility, emotional resonance, and practical partnership potential. I have prepared a comprehensive testing protocol based on human psychological research. Alex looked around his laboratory, which was rapidly becoming ground zero for the galaxy's most systematically planned accidental wedding, and realized that his quiet life of agricultural research had officially ended the moment Zephyra had stepped off that diplomatic vessel. Outside, the crowd of colonists was growing larger, and someone had started playing music that sounded like a fusion of human folk songs and Valerian ceremonial themes. His peaceful career studying crop genetics had somehow transformed into a diplomatic event with interstellar implications and what appeared to be professional wedding planning. "This is really happening, isn't it?" he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Yes," Zephyra replied with the kind of certainty that suggested she'd never doubted it for a moment. "Though I confess, I am somewhat nervous about whether you will find our compatibility satisfactory. My research into human preferences may have been incomplete." Alex looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd stepped off the diplomatic vessel. Beneath the formal robes and official composure, he caught a glimpse of someone who seemed genuinely uncertain about whether he would accept her after 15 years of preparation. The realization that she might be as nervous as he was somehow made the entire situation feel less like a diplomatic crisis and more like something else entirely. 3 weeks later, Alex found himself standing in his laboratory at 3 a.m., staring at a holographic display showing the molecular structure of a hybrid plant that shouldn't have been able to exist according to any known principles of xenobotany. Zephyra stood beside him, her pointed ears catching the soft blue glow of the data projections, quietly reviewing calculations that challenged everything he thought he knew about cross-species agricultural science. "The protein synthesis pathways are completely unprecedented," she murmured, her voice carrying the kind of excited precision that Alex had learned to associate with major scientific breakthroughs. "If we can replicate this cellular structure in controlled conditions, it could revolutionize food production across 17 different planetary environments." Alex nodded, trying to process the implications of what they'd discovered during their compatibility assessment period. What had started as Zephyra's systematic evaluation of their potential partnership had evolved into the most productive research collaboration of his career. Her expertise in Valerian biotechnology complemented his knowledge of Earth agricultural systems in ways that were producing results neither of them could have achieved alone. "I never would have thought to approach the problem from a bioluminescent angle," Alex admitted, adjusting the holographic display to show cellular activity in real time. "Human agricultural science tends to focus on chemical enhancement rather than organic light manipulation. And I would never have considered the nutrient absorption applications you've identified," Zephyra replied with what had become a familiar expression of genuine scientific enthusiasm. Valerian biotechnology emphasizes aesthetic and ceremonial applications. The practical feeding applications are elegant. Their research sessions had become a nightly routine over the past few weeks, partly because they both worked best during the quiet hours when the laboratory was free from interruptions, and partly because their conversations had evolved beyond simple compatibility testing into something that felt like genuine intellectual partnership. Alex's communicator chimed softly with a message from Maya. "Boss, the colony's planning committee wants to finalize catering arrangements. Also, your mom and Zephyra's diplomatic escort have apparently bonded over shared concerns about your tendency to skip meals. They're organizing some kind of intervention. The wedding planning is getting out of hand," Alex said, though his tone carried more amusement than panic. "I think the entire colony has decided to treat this as the social event of the decade. Your people seem to enjoy celebratory gatherings, Zephyra observed with the kind of clinical interest that suggested she was mentally cataloging human social behaviors. Valerian ceremonies tend to be more formal. Less spontaneous musical performances and community involvement. Is that a problem? Alex asked, realizing that he'd started caring about her answer in ways that went beyond diplomatic politeness. Zephyra was quiet for a moment, her silver-flecked eyes studying the plant samples they'd been analyzing. I confess, she said finally, that I find human celebratory customs more appealing than I anticipated. The collaborative approach to event planning suggests a cultural emphasis on community support that is pleasant. Pleasant, Alex repeated with a grin. That's probably the most diplomatic way anyone's ever described Mrs. Patterson's tendency to reorganize other people's social events. Your neighbor Mrs. Patterson has been extremely helpful, Zephyra said with complete seriousness. She has provided extensive guidance on human courtship behaviors and suggested several activities for continued compatibility assessment. Such as, tomorrow evening, she has arranged what she calls a proper date, involving a meal at the colony's recreational facility followed by observation of local astronomical phenomena. She indicated that sharing food and stargazing represent traditional human bonding activities. Alex felt something that might have been anticipation rather than diplomatic obligation. That sounds, actually nice. I have researched human dating protocols extensively, Zephyra continued with the kind of academic thoroughness that Alex was learning to find endearing rather than intimidating. However, I suspect that practical experience may provide insights that theoretical study cannot. Probably, Alex agreed, then paused as a thought occurred to him. Zephyra, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you really spend 15 years preparing for this? I mean, beyond the legal obligation aspects. You could have had the Valerian legal system declare the contract invalid based on my age when it was made. There had to be diplomatic ways to resolve this without actually following through with marriage plans. Zephyra set down the data pad she'd been holding and turned to face him fully, her expression shifting from scientific focus to something more personal. You want to know whether I pursued this because of duty or because of choice? I guess I do. She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving between the experimental plants and the holographic displays that showed their collaborative research results. When I was 10 years old, she said finally, I had never met anyone who treated my questions as if they were important rather than merely curious. Human children on your colony seemed more interested in games and entertainment than in understanding how things worked. But I wasn't. You spent 3 hours explaining crop genetics to me, Zephyra said with what might have been a smile. When I asked why different plants grew at different rates, you didn't just say, that's how it works. You showed me soil samples and talked about nutrition absorption and growing seasons. You treated me like my curiosity mattered. Alex felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the laboratory's heating system. I remember that conversation. You asked better questions than most of my university professors. When you promised to marry me, Zephyra continued, it was the first time anyone had suggested that being different from them was an advantage rather than a limitation. You said I was smart and interesting and that my differences made me more appealing rather than less. And that stuck with you for 15 years. That changed how I saw myself, Zephyra corrected gently. I began to view my analytical nature and scientific curiosity as strengths rather than social limitations. When I pursued advanced education, I chose fields that would complement your interests not because of legal obligation, but because I wanted to become someone worthy of the confidence you'd shown in me. Alex stared at her, feeling pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. So this isn't really about childhood promises or legal obligations. No, Zephyra agreed. This is about becoming the kind of person who deserves to be chosen by someone who sees value in intellectual curiosity, scientific collaboration, and the kind of partnership that makes both individuals better than they would be alone. And you think I'm that person? I think, Zephyra said with the kind of careful precision that suggested she'd thought about this extensively, that you have the potential to be that person. And I think I have developed into someone who could be a worthy partner for that potential. Alex looked around his laboratory, noting how much their joint research had accomplished in just 3 weeks. The plant samples, the collaborative data analysis, the late-night conversations that had evolved from compatibility assessments into genuine intellectual exchanges, all of it pointed toward a partnership that went beyond childhood promises or diplomatic obligations. So, he said slowly, hypothetically, if I were to ask you to marry me, not because of a legal contract or childhood promises, but because I think we make an excellent team and I'd like to see what else we could accomplish together, what would you say? Zephyr's expression shifted into something that was definitely a smile, carrying warmth that made her silver-flecked eyes seem to glow in the laboratory's soft lighting. I would say that this represents a significant improvement in proposal methodology over your previous attempt. My previous attempt involved a 10-year-old declaring intentions in a cornfield, Alex pointed out with a laugh. The bar wasn't exactly set high. True, Zephyr agreed. Though I should note that your current proposal methodology still lacks certain formal elements that Valerian customs consider important. Such as actually asking the question rather than discussing hypothetical scenarios. Alex felt his grin widening as he stepped closer to her, noting how the formal diplomatic distance she'd maintained for weeks had somehow evaporated during their late-night research sessions. Zephyr of Eltar, will you marry me? Not because of promises we made as children, but because I think you're brilliant and fascinating and the best research partner I've ever had, and I'd like to spend the next several decades discovering what other impossible things we can accomplish together. Yes, she said without hesitation, then added with characteristic precision, though I should note that Valerian lifespans are significantly longer than human ones. You may want to adjust your temporal projections accordingly. How significantly longer are we talking about? Approximately 3 times human longevity, assuming standard medical care. Alex considered this information for about half a second. That just means more time for research projects. Zephyr's laugh carried harmonics that suggested genuine delight rather than diplomatic politeness. I believe this confirms optimal compatibility assessment results. Definitely, Alex agreed, then paused as another thought occurred to him. Though I probably should mention that Mrs. Patterson is going to take complete credit for this when she finds out her dating advice worked. Mrs. Patterson has earned credit acknowledgement, Zephyr said with complete seriousness. Her insights into human social customs have been invaluable. In that case, Alex said, pulling out his communicator, should probably let everyone know that the wedding planning can continue. Officially this time. As he composed a message to Maya, Alex realized that his quiet life of agricultural research hadn't ended when Zephyr stepped off that diplomatic vessel, it had evolved into something better. The partnership they'd built over the past few weeks felt like the beginning of discoveries that neither of them could have imagined alone. Outside the laboratory windows, the sun was beginning to rise over New Haven Colony's agricultural sectors, casting golden light across fields that would soon benefit from the hybrid techniques they'd developed together. Alex looked at Zephyr, who was already reviewing their research notes with the kind of focused enthusiasm that suggested she was planning their next collaborative project, and realized that some childhood promises were worth growing into rather than growing out of. His communicator chimed with responses from what appeared to be half the colony, all expressing various degrees of excitement about the official engagement announcement. The wedding planning, which had apparently never really stopped despite his protests, could now proceed with full diplomatic and community support. So, Alex said, watching Zephyr adjust their experimental data projections with the kind of precise movements that he'd learned to associate with brilliant insights, any regrets about spending 15 years preparing to marry someone who keeps irregular sleeping schedules and talks to plants? Only one, Zephyr replied with what was definitely a smile. What's that? I should have started learning human humor appreciation earlier in my preparation protocol. Your jokes require significant cultural context to fully understand. That's what makes them funny, Alex said, leaning over to review her calculations. The confusion is part of the appeal. Fascinating, Zephyr murmured, making notes on what appeared to be an ongoing analysis of human social behaviors. I will need to incorporate humor studies into our continuing compatibility research. Alex grinned, realizing that marrying a xenobiologist who approached relationships with scientific methodology was probably going to result in the most thoroughly analyzed marriage in galactic history. He found the prospect surprisingly appealing.